Hey, it's Tom from Toons, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to install the NytCruz auto lighting sensor to keep your navigation lights on when they're supposed to be. As we get to installing this, we're just going to go step by step how the directions tell you how to install it. Stay tuned because I'm going to show you a second way to install this towards the end of the video. I think is going to help you if you want more options with this system. I'm going to show you how to tie in and make it so your switch can power this whole system as well. The pieces you're going to have are the little module here, control module. It's kind of your brain box, getting information from the photo eye, sending it out to your wiring or your lights. We've got an adhesive pad. We're going to use that today to stick this into the console. We've got our photo eye. This is the brains of the whole operation. This is what's sensing that daylight or lack thereof and turning on your navigation lights for you. We've got a pigtail lead. This is going to go from the module into your wiring of your switch panel or into your wiring for your navigation lights. We'll get there. That's the part that most of you are probably watching this for. And then we've also got these, you can call them whatever you want, Wago. My brain tells me it's called a Wago, so that's what we're gonna go with. I have it open right now, but this is a simple splicing device that's going to allow you to push wires in and then you close down, and that's going to pinch the wire in to hold it tight. We can join a bunch of wires together in here in order to have all of our wires spliced without actually using any butt splices. If you haven't noticed, I'm getting over a little cold, so sorry if the sound is a little goofy, but I got a little stuffy nose. We're working on it.
Still no cavitation zone though.
Still not cavitating. These hats are for sale on our website. No Cavitation Club. It's a good club to be in. You may be wondering, who is this thing for? This NytCruz automatic navigation light thing. Yes, I trust that most of you can remember to flip that switch on or off when you're out at night. But maybe, maybe Bob and Sue went out and they just had a few too many, and they don't want to get a ticket, but they're doing their evening booze cruise. If they're running their motor, their key is on, when it gets dark enough, the lights come on the boat, they are one less person that the Coast Guard, the sheriff, or anybody else is going to want to bother because they're doing things legit. Be safe out there on the water. I'm not saying this is your ticket to going and breaking the law, but if you've got kids who are operating the boat and you don't want them to get pulled over in the evening time, you've got a rental boat, and you don't want your renters to get hassled because they forgot to turn the navigation lights on. Yes, we can all try to remember, but this is that fail-safe way to make sure that you're not going to forget. Fail-safe, fail-proof. Yeah. So that's who this might be for. It might be for everybody. It might not be for you. That's okay. It's just a backup in case you forget to hit that switch and you don't want to get hassled by the association on your private lake, the sheriff, the Coast Guard, or anybody else who's patrolling your water, or just that nosy neighbor who's always yelling at you. Got all my pieces here. I am going to need wire strippers in a minute. I'm going to need a 1-inch. This is a hole cutting bit. If you have a 1-inch drill bit, that'll work too, but we got to cut a 1-inch hole. That's the first thing that we're going to do actually, is cut our 1-inch hole for our photo eye to sit down in. I'm installing this on the large helm from pontoonstuff.com. And I've already backed off. This boat was completely wired, completely done. Unhook your power before starting this project. That's number 1 instruction actually. But if we pull this panel out, I've got this panel and then I've got my gauge panel, and I'll show you why in just a second. If you're installing this setup on a different style console, or maybe it's just a factory boat, you can still do it. And a lot of these steps are going to look very similar to your boat. But if I pull this out, there's a little ledge inside of here that's going to give me a place to put my module on. If it can't reach in your console, this adhesive pad will allow you to stick it anywhere you need to. But we're going to go ahead and run this in on the top side of the console here, make sure there's nothing behind it, just double check. And we're going to cut that 1-inch hole. I just happen to have my impact up here, and if you're using a drill, you will get a much nicer cut. That slides right in my 1-inch hole. I'm going to run this plastic nut over the wire from the bottom side, and I'm going to go ahead and thread that on to hold my photo eye in place. Make sure you've got enough room underneath. It's real tight for me here to get that nut to turn around. I'm running into the sidewall just a little bit. I'm able to still turn it though. I've got my wires down in. I'm now going to install my module. We're going to use that adhesive. This is supplied with it, or you could use screws. Just apply it to the back side, and then it's a peel and stick. That back is a little tricky to get peeled off, but that's how you know it's going to stick well. I've got my 4-prong connector that's going to go to my photo eye, so I'll orient that properly there. Find a good flat, clean spot to stick that. And I like that. Now I can plug my photo eye into the module. You hear that click in. That is now attached. We're ready to move on to the wiring side of things already. The first wire that we need to track down is what's going to supply power from our key on power. I'm going to rob that right off of my gauge panel here because this purple wire, I'm installing this on a Mercury, but this is the gauge panel that comes from Pontoon Stuff, and it is wired like you'd see a Mercury, Mariner, or a Johnson or Evinrude. We've got a gray wire, a black wire, and a purple wire. In this case, the purple wire is our ignition wire, our key on power. When I turn the key on, we have power supplied to our gauges. That means that when I turn the key on, there is power. This purple wire is hot. Now is the time, double check that your power is turned off at your battery, completely unhooked your accessory harness, as well as your ignition for your motor, those battery cables. I've got lots of options to choose from. I'm just gonna grab from this post here. We'll back the nut off. And keep in mind, in case you're redoing your whole boat, your accessory harness, that harness that we love so much, does not plug and play with your gauges. Your gauges actually plug into your ignition harness for your motor, totally separate than your accessory harness that plugs into your switch panel. Depending on your boat's setup, you may or may not need extra wire. I have this always laying around, so I'm going to keep with a purple wire. That's that key on power. Make sure I've got enough lead, give myself a little extra, because we're going to end up needing to run this over closer to our switch panel. You could just cut and splice this right into that ignition, that purple wire, the key on power. That would be fine too, but we're going to keep it as clean as possible, and we're just going to piggyback off of this key on power wire that goes to my gauges. The other wire that we need to run over and have ready is a black ground wire. We've got one right here. I can just piggyback on top of this gauge as well. These are all going to a shared ground. So my accessory harness with my lights, that goes to a ground that's shared with this same gauge package from the ignition for the motor. When I say shared ground, that just means that this black ground wire eventually makes its way back and ties into the ground wire that's supplying my switch panel and navigation lights their ground. I'm gonna give myself enough of a length of that to tie in. This is why it's so important to use the proper color wiring when you're working on your boat. Just because you have some white wire laying around or some blue wire or green wire doesn't mean that you should add that in to your project to make a section of ground. Please stick to the right colors, the correct colors. It'll save you and other people in the future a lot of headache. That's all we need to do on our gauge panel. Our next wire that we're going to need to pull from is going to be our constant power from the battery. So anytime if you have a battery switch or the battery is just connected at all times, that's going to come in on our accessory harness here, which is right here. This is our main power in. As you can see, we've already changed things up a little bit on this panel. That's totally fine. But we are going to chase one of these where it jumps across, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to piggyback off of this constant power. This is your battery wire. always has power, whether the key switch is on or not. This wire is hot. If I chase it across, it comes in, it jumps around to all my breakers. I'm just going to grab this last breaker on the end here, unplug that. I'm going to give myself just a little extra wire here just in case. I've got red wire to correspond to that constant power wire. And what this is, believe it or not, we sell these on our website, tomstoons.com. We've got connector kits that have piggyback splices just like this in here. And all I need to do is piggyback into that constant power wire coming from the battery. And then I can plug this in. Now everything's operating again as it should. But what I've done is I've taken that constant power and now I can run it out to the harness that goes to the module. So I'll give myself a little lead of red here. And I like to do this just to keep these connections tight and tidy. Either electric tape or zip tie. Helps make sure that it stays as one connection there. So let's take our wires that we've already identified. We've got our black ground wire. We've got a purple key on power and then our red steady power or battery power. I'm going to splice each of these back about 1/2 inch. I like to give the end a little twist. Just keeps them nice and tight as we insert them into that Wago. So I'm just going to take, this is coming from my gauge panel, my key on power. I slide that all the way in until I feel it stop. And then I close that Wago and that's locked in there now. Now I'm going to grab that harness that came with, that's going to connect to the module here. And I'm going to find my purple wire and connect that, twist the end, have it spliced back. And I'm going to slide it into the opening next to that. And then I close that. And that's the only two that are going to go into this Wago. I can go ahead and close that completely. Those wires are essentially spliced together. They're now connected. I'm going to do the same thing for that black and red wire too. So I take that ground that's coming off of my gauge panel, that's in my Wago, and then I take the ground from the harness that'll go to the module, shove that in, close everything up tight. We're good and snug. And I've got one more wire here to do, and that's that red. So those first wires that I showed you connecting, those are all tied into Wagos. Those are good to go. Before we're all done, we could tie this up with some electric tape, tie it into the gauge harness or the back of the switch harness or switch panel, whatever we want to do in order to tidy things up so that stuff's not going to rattle and shake loose over time or get caught when you go to grab something out of the console. We have two more wires. We have a solid gray wire and then we have a gray wire with a white stripe. My solid gray is going to go to just the anchor light, and then my gray with a white stripe is going to be wired into my navigation lights. So those 3-in-1 basically, where I flip the switch forward and that would turn on all 3 lights, bow, red and green, and anchor light. So I need to find those wires that are going to correspond to this gray and gray with a white. Those are going to be found on my switch panel here. On this switch, this is my navigation and anchor switch. So when I push this switch forward, it'll turn on all of my lights. When I flip it back, it'll turn on just my anchor light. This gray with a blue wire is going to be found in 2 places coming out of this switch. That's because I have this top one here. That's going to correspond when I push just the anchor light on. The bottom one is going to power the stern light or the anchor light when I push the switch forward to turn all of my navigation lights on. Per the instructions, I'm going to take this top wire that's just for my anchor light and I'm going to tie into this with a Wago and that solid gray wire. So I can pull that wire right off and we're going to splice it back 1/2 inch to go into the Wago. I know. I keep saying splice it back. I mean strip it back to expose the wire. And then I take that solid gray And we're going to run that into the Wago with the anchor light wire. Triple check. That white stripe is faint. Want to make sure we get the right wire in there. So solid gray goes in with my anchor light. I've got one more wire from my harness to the module, as well as one more Wago left. This last one is the one Wago that you're going to use all 3 openings. So what we need to do here is I'm going to go ahead and slide that gray with a white stripe into the end, close that up, and then I'm going to remove those bottom wires, so my gray with a blue stripe. I'm going to remove that from my navigation switch, and I'm going to remove that gray with a green. That's my bow lights. Come on, there we go. Whew, my fingies. My fingers hurt.
Now your back's gonna hurt. You just pulled my duty.
We can cut these connectors off too. Strip them back and tie them into the Wago. So it doesn't matter where I slide these, but I'm going to take that gray with the blue, put that into one of the openings of the Wago, close it tight, and the gray with the green. My last step in this installation is plugging this into the module. Then we can test everything out once we hook power back up to the battery. So, if you wondered if it worked, it does not like indoor lights. It only recognizes solar, so outdoor light, UV, I don't know how that all works. But if you look right now, the bow lights are off. When I turn the key to key on power, I hear the module click. That gets the signal from the photo eye, and that tells my lights to turn on. So if you look at the anchor light, that should be on as well. Are you ready for the fun part? If I was installing this system on my own boat, I still really want the option to turn my navigation lights on and off without my key switch being on. I don't want to put more hours on the computer, drain my battery by having my key switch in the on position, because if I'm not driving my boat at night, if I'm adrift watching fireworks or something else, there's a good chance that I'm going to want my key switch off, my dash lights off, but I want to be legal and have my navigation lights on. That's important. I'm still required to have them on even if I'm adrift. So I'm going to show you how to tie in and make it so your switch can power this whole system as well. What I'm going to do to give myself the option to use this system with my key on or key off and use the navigation switch, either or both, key switch on and navigation switch on. We got double protection. That's how I'm going to wire this right now. So I need to remove these Wagos, and then we're just going to tie in still from that gray and white wire from the module. We need to get that into our key switch and keep it connected to our navigation light wires so that our navigation lights are receiving power from the module when the key is on and or from the navigation light switch on my dash panel. It doesn't care as long as it's getting 12 volts of power. That's all you have to think about this. We're just supplying 12 volts of positive from my switch out to the navigation lights. When I have my key switch on, 12 volts is there. But when I turn the key switch off, we lose that 12 volts. Well, now I'm going to replace the key switch with the switch on the dash so that if the key switch is off, I can still get 12 volts through the system to my lights. So let's do this one at a time so we don't confuse wires. I'm going to start with that Wago with the 3 wires in it. What I'm going to do here is basically put my spade connections back on, but I'm going to join my gray with a white stripe with my gray with a green stripe. I just need to make sure that this gray with a white stripe gets 12 volts when it needs it from the switch. When I flip the switch on, both the gray with the green and the gray with the blue are going to get that voltage that it needs to power the module and power the navigation lights. Because these 3 were connected in one Wago, we're going to keep them connected just by a jumper between them. But I'm going to start by tying in my wire from the module to that gray with the green. I'm going to take a bigger piggyback spade splice and splice those together so those two are linked. And in this case, I do like to heat shrink it just so we lock everything up nice and snug. Before I plug it back onto that post, it was on the farther right post facing the horn on that side. I'm going to make a little jumper. We got a little piece of gray wire here. So this gets a spade splice on one side, and then it's going to combine with my gray with a blue stripe, that stern light wire, on the other side. So this gray wire, the importance here of tying it into both or all of our lights, all of our wires, is so that when the key-on power is on, if I forget to hit my switch, I'm still going to power up my navigation lights. Just a big spade terminal on that. And we'll shrink that one up too. And I'm going to take my jumper wire, connect that to the piggyback of my gray with a green. Just easier to do before it's on the plug. And we'll run a zip tie on that. Again, electric tape works just fine here as well. Now I'm ready to plug these back on. We've got those hooked back up now. Again, I'm supplying power from the switch to my navigation lights, but I'm also supplying power from the module to my navigation lights. In that case, we've got one more to do here, and we're just going to combine these two, remove our Wago. I have two options on this one. I could splice these two together and put them on the terminal post of the switch, or I could keep them in the Wago and just add a third wire out to that post. Totally fine, whichever option you choose. There is no room to piggyback these, so your best option is going to be to keep them in the Wago and run a single wire back in, or combine them into one splice and hook that back up to the switch, which is what I'm going to do. Either option is perfectly fine. And shrinking these, when I join two wires, it just adds some glue in there because there's glue inside of these heat shrink splices, and it helps tie those wires together so they never want to pull apart. Once everything's back in place, really shouldn't get any force on them or anything that would make them want to come apart, but let's just take that extra second to make sure it's done properly. Now I just plug that back on that post. Everything is hooked back up. Again, what we did here, just in a nutshell, is we kept the wiring that we did previously that's giving us key-on power, ground, and steady battery power to the module. Those module wires are still running and combining into our navigation light wires at the back of the switch. Here's the beauty. When I turn the switch on, my navigation lights are still going to come on because the module still kicks on. So if you take a look, that starboard green light is on, my anchor light is on, and what's actually really neat is it's showing me here that my navigation lights are on. When I turn that key on power off, you'll see here there's a slight delay before the module picks up that there's not daylight. That click, and when that light comes on is when your navigation lights are turning on. So kind of cool. It powers the backlight of that switch at the same time. But here's the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place, or why I would do it on my own boat, is if I'm not running the motor and I want peace and quiet and still and no extra added light pollution, I want to just flip one switch and have my lights come on, and that's what I get. So now my navigation lights are getting my 12-volt power from the switch. One big thing to remember on this setup is because the module is involved, you will always have all three lights, your bow lights and your stern light. There's no way to get just your stern light. It's going to be all three. Big picture, that's really not a big deal. As long as you've got your lights on, then you are good to go. That is how straightforward and simple installing this NytCruz automatic navigation light system is. Give it a try on your boat. If you're ever worried about going out late and forgetting to turn that light on, getting stopped, no reason. And if you just want to be safe on the water and make sure you don't forget to turn your lights on so you can be seen and avoided by other vessels. Thank you for watching. Hope these tips were helpful.